The night before we finalized the divorce, my daughter-in-law slept with my husband. I stayed quiet. At the lawyer's office, they smirked. Then I opened my purse and handed him a folder. He went silent. She started shaking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it all began. 3 weeks before that moment when everything fell apart, I was supposed to be in Denver, visiting my sister Carol for her 65th birthday celebration. I'd been looking forward to it for months, especially after the tension that had been building at home. My husband Charles had been distant lately, working late more often, and there was something different about the way he looked at me, or rather, the way he didn't look at me anymore. My flight was delayed twice before being canceled entirely due to a storm system moving through Colorado. By the time I made it back home that Thursday evening, it was nearly 10 o'clock. The house was dark except for the soft glow coming from the kitchen window.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
I used my key quietly, not wanting to wake anyone if Charles had already gone to bed. But as I stepped into the entryway, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Low, intimate voices that made my stomach clench with a premonition I didn't want to acknowledge. I set my overnight bag down silently and moved toward the kitchen, my heart already pounding. Through the archway, I could see them clearly. Charles, my husband of 28 years, had his arms wrapped around my daughter-in-law, Jennifer. Not a friendly hug, not a comforting embrace. This was intimate, desperate, the kind of closeness that spoke of familiarity and longing. "She'll never have to know," Jennifer was whispering, her hand resting on Charles's chest. "Margaret's getting older anyway. When you finally leave her, we can be together for real." The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't a momentary lapse, a single mistake born of loneliness or alcohol. This was planned, calculated. They had a future mapped out, and it didn't include me. "I just need to time it right," Charles replied, his voice tender in a way he hadn't spoken to me in years. "The divorce papers are ready. After tomorrow's meeting with the lawyers, it'll all be set in motion." Jennifer pulled back slightly, looking up at him with those doe eyes that had always seemed so innocent to me. "I can't wait to not have to pretend anymore. Do you know how hard it's been, calling her mom and acting like I care about her feelings?" They laughed together, low and conspirative, and something inside me withered completely. This was the woman I'd welcomed into our family 8 years ago. The young woman I'd defended when my own friends whispered that she was too young for my son Michael, too ambitious, too focused on what our family could provide for her. I'd championed her, helped plan her wedding, babysat when she needed time for her career. I'd grown to love her like the daughter I never had. "She's so trusting," Jennifer continued, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. "Remember last month when I suggested she visit Carol more often? She actually thanked me for being so thoughtful about her relationship with her sister." Charles chuckled. "You've been masterful at managing her. The way you've gradually gotten Michael to pull away from her, too. That was brilliant." My knees nearly gave out. Michael, my son, had been growing increasingly distant over the past year. I'd attributed it to the normal progression of a marriage, a young man establishing his independence from his mother, but it had been orchestrated. Jennifer had been poisoning him against me, systematically isolating me from my own child. "Michael's so easy to manipulate," Jennifer said with casual cruelty. "I just keep telling him that his mother interferes too much, that she doesn't respect our boundaries. He believes everything I say. Soon, she'll be completely alone." The kitchen fell quiet except for the soft sounds of their kissing, and I forced myself to move backward, step by silent step, until I reached my overnight bag. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle, but I managed to pick it up and slip back outside. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. 28 years of marriage, 8 years of treating Jennifer like family, a lifetime of putting my husband and son first, making their happiness my priority, building my entire identity around being a good wife and mother. And this was how it ended. Not with a confession or even an argument, but with the discovery that I'd been slowly erased from my own life by the two people I'd trusted most. When I finally went back inside, I made sure to slam the front door and call out loudly, Charles, I'm home. The flight was canceled. By the time I reached the kitchen, it was empty. I could hear movement upstairs. Charles, no doubt, pretending he'd been asleep all along. Jennifer's car was gone from the driveway. That night, lying next to my husband in the bed we'd shared for nearly 3 decades, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't break down or beg or demand explanations. Instead, I would watch, listen, and learn, because if 28 years had taught me anything, it was that Charles underestimated me completely, and if Jennifer thought I was just a trusting old woman who could be easily discarded, she was about to discover exactly how wrong she was. The next morning, Charles kissed my cheek before leaving for work, the same perfunctory gesture he'd given me for months. "Sleep well?" he asked, not really waiting for an answer. "Like a baby," I replied, and for the first time in years, I meant it. My real education was just beginning. The morning after my discovery, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the same spot where I'd seen my husband embracing my daughter-in-law just hours before. Everything looked normal in the daylight. The granite countertops Charles had insisted on installing last year, the farmhouse sink I'd chosen, the family photos clustered on the windowsill, but now it all felt contaminated somehow, like a crime scene disguised as a home. I started a notebook that day, not a diary full of emotions and tears, but something methodical, clinical. I wrote down everything I could remember from the past year, every moment that had seemed slightly off, but that I'd explained away with the benefit of the doubt I'd always given my family. The patterns emerged like a photograph developing in slow motion. Last September, when Michael had canceled our monthly lunch date for the 3rd time in a row, claiming he was swamped at work, Jennifer had been so sympathetic, rubbing my arm and suggesting that maybe I was putting too much pressure on him. "Men need space to breathe, Mom," she'd said, and I'd actually thanked her for the insight. October brought the incident with the family photos. I'd noticed that several pictures of me with the grandchildren had been moved from the mantel to a drawer. When I asked about it, Jennifer explained that she was updating the decor and that some of the frames were getting a bit dated. She'd promised to put them back up once she found better frames, but they never reappeared. November was when Charles started working late on the same nights Michael traveled for his job. I'd mentioned it to Jennifer once, worried that Charles was overworking himself. She'd been quick to reassure me, saying she'd talked to Charles about it and that he was just trying to provide security for our future. The way she said, "our future," should have been my first clue. December brought the Christmas incident that had puzzled me for months. Jennifer had organized the entire holiday celebration, taking over traditions I'd maintained for decades. When I tried to contribute my famous stuffing recipe, she'd gently suggested that maybe it was time to try something new, and that she'd already ordered everything from a gourmet caterer. Michael had supported her completely, saying it would be less stressful for me. I'd spent Christmas Day feeling like a guest in my own home, watching Jennifer play hostess with my china, my crystal, my silverware. She'd been gracious about it, constantly asking if I needed anything, but there was something in her eyes I couldn't identify then. Now I knew what it was: ownership. She'd been practicing for the role she planned to fill permanently. January had brought the suggestion that I should visit Carol more often. "You two are so close," Jennifer had said, "and Carol's getting older. You should spend more time with her while you can." She'd even helped me book flights, insisting on handling all the arrangements because I had enough to worry about. February was when I noticed that my weekly coffee dates with my friend Ruth had started being interrupted by Jennifer's emergencies. Suddenly, she needed me to babysit at the last minute, or there was a family crisis that required my immediate attention. Ruth had started making jokes about how I was too popular to keep commitments, but I could hear the hurt underneath her laughter. March brought the financial discussions. Charles had started mentioning retirement more frequently, but not in the way married couples usually plan for their golden years together. His conversations were vague, focused on downsizing and simplifying our lives. When I tried to engage with specifics, he'd wave me off, saying he was still working out the details. The notebook filled up quickly, and with each entry, I felt a cold understanding settle over me. This hadn't been a sudden betrayal. This had been a carefully orchestrated campaign to remove me from my own life, piece by piece, relationship by relationship. I decided to test my theory. That afternoon, I called Jennifer. "Honey," I said, putting warmth into my voice that I no longer felt. "I was thinking about what you said about spending more time with Carol. Maybe I should plan another trip soon." "Oh, that's wonderful." Jennifer's enthusiasm was immediate and felt genuine. "When were you thinking? Maybe next week? I could stay for 10 days or so, really give us some quality time together." "That sounds perfect. You know what? I'll help you book the flights right now. We want to make sure you get the best deals." Within an hour, Jennifer had called me back with flight information, hotel recommendations, and even suggestions for activities Carol and I could do together. Her efficiency was remarkable, and her eagerness to get me out of town for an extended period was telling. I thanked her profusely and confirmed the arrangements, knowing I would cancel them the next day. That evening, Charles came home earlier than usual, which should have been a relief. Instead, I watched him carefully, looking for signs I'd been trained not to see. He was distracted during dinner, checking his phone frequently and giving short answers to my questions about his day. "You seem tired," I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. He pulled away slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough that I felt it. "Just a long day. Big project wrapping up. Maybe you should take some time off when it's finished. We could plan a vacation, just the two of us." The suggestion clearly made him uncomfortable. "I don't know, Margaret. Things are pretty busy right now. Maybe in a few months. A few months, after the divorce was finalized, presumably." "Of course," I said. "I understand." Later that night, as Charles showered, I did something I'd never done in 28 years of marriage. I looked through his phone. The messages weren't hard to find. They were under Jennifer's name. But these weren't the innocent family communications I would have expected from my son's wife. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Em will be in Chicago until Thursday. The lawyer said everything should be finalized by next week. Then we can stop pretending." I told her she should visit her sister more often. She's already booking flights. She's so clueless. Sometimes I almost feel sorry for her. I scrolled back through weeks of messages, each one another nail in the coffin of my marriage and my relationship with my family. The level of detail was staggering. They'd planned everything: when to meet, how to avoid suspicion, what to tell me to keep me occupied and out of the way. But the most devastating messages were the ones about Michael. "Told Em that his mother was being too clingy again. He's pulling back just like we wanted. Em said he thinks his mom needs to find her own interests. The guilt trips are working. By the time this is over, he'll be so conditioned to see her as a burden that he'll probably thank us." I set the phone down with hands that were surprisingly steady. My son, my baby boy who I'd rocked to sleep and cheered at Little League games and helped through his first heartbreak, had been systematically turned against me by the woman he'd married, the woman I'd helped him choose the engagement ring for, the woman whose wedding dress I'd helped her pick out, the woman I'd held when she cried about her difficult relationship with her own mother. I went to bed that night with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The sadness was still there, a deep ache that felt like it might never fully heal, but underneath it was something harder, something that would sustain me through what was coming. I wasn't just going to survive this betrayal. I was going to make sure that Charles and Jennifer learned what it felt like to underestimate someone completely. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy went and what they were planning for my future. Because if I'd learned anything from 28 years of being married to Charles, it was that he never did anything without a plan. And if Jennifer thought she could manipulate me the way she'd manipulated my son, she was about to discover that some women don't break as easily as others. The next morning, I canceled my trip to Denver and started making some plans of my own. The private investigator's office was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of the seedy, cigarette-stained space from detective movies, David Morrison operated out of a clean, professional suite in a downtown office building. He was probably my age, with kind eyes and the sort of steady demeanor that made me understand why people trusted him with their darkest secrets. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, settling behind his desk with a notepad. "What can I help you with today?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my mind, But sitting there in that sterile office, the words felt heavier than I'd anticipated. I need to know what my husband and daughter-in-law are planning. I have reason to believe they're having an affair, and I think there's more to it than just the betrayal. David nodded without judgment, his pen poised over the notepad. How long have you suspected this? I caught them together 3 days ago, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. But looking back, I think it's been going on for months, maybe longer. And you want documentation? I want everything. I want to know when they meet, what they discuss, what they're planning for the future. I want to know if my son is involved, or if he's being manipulated too. I paused, gathering courage for the next part. And I want to know what they're planning to do with me. David looked up from his notes. What makes you think they're planning something specific? I told him about the messages I'd found, about the systematic isolation I'd documented, about Jennifer's eagerness to send me away for extended periods. With each detail, I watched David's expression grow more serious. Mrs. Patterson, he said finally, this sounds like a pattern I've seen before. Financial abuse often starts with emotional isolation. Have you noticed any changes in your access to accounts, credit cards, financial information? The question hit me like ice water. I haven't been paying attention to that, I admitted. Charles has always handled most of the finances. I trust him. I think it might be time to start paying attention. That afternoon, I visited our bank for the first time in years without Charles. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Charles had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into accounts that only had his name on them. Over the past 6 months, he'd transferred nearly $60,000. Is there a problem with these transactions? The bank manager asked, clearly concerned by my expression. I wasn't aware of them, I said carefully. Mrs. Patterson, I should mention that someone has been making inquiries about your accounts, about the procedures for accessing them in case something happened to you. My blood ran cold. What kind of inquiries? Questions about power of attorney, about what would happen to joint accounts if one spouse became incapacitated or passed away. I assumed it was just estate planning, but given your reaction, I left the bank with copies of all our financial records and a growing sense of urgency. Whatever Charles and Jennifer were planning, it wasn't just about having an affair and getting a divorce. They were positioning themselves to take everything. That evening, I played my role perfectly. I asked Charles about his day, served dinner with a smile, and mentioned casually that I'd decided to take that trip to visit Carol after all. That's wonderful, he said, and I could see the relief in his eyes. When are you thinking of going? Next week, probably. Jennifer found some great flight deals. How long will you stay? I was thinking 2 weeks, maybe 3. Carol's been so lonely since her husband died. Charles nodded enthusiastically. That sounds perfect. You deserve some time with your sister. Perfect. The word echoed in my mind as I watched my husband of 28 years actively encourage me to leave town so he could continue his affair with my daughter-in-law. The next morning, while Charles was at work, I received an unexpected visitor. Michael stood on my doorstep, and for a moment, my heart leaped with hope. Maybe he'd discovered the truth. Maybe he was here to warn me, to protect me, to be the son I'd raised him to be. Hi, Mom, he said, giving me a brief hug before stepping into the foyer. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Of course, sweetheart. Always. We sat in the living room, and I studied his face, looking for signs of the warm, loving boy I'd raised. But there was a distance in his eyes, a coolness that reminded me too much of the messages I'd read on Charles's phone. Mom, Jennifer and I have been talking, and we're a little concerned about you. The words were so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't process them. Concerned about me? You seem, more clingy lately, more needy. Jennifer mentioned that you've been calling her a lot, and when we canceled those lunch dates, you seemed really upset. I stared at my son, watching him deliver what was clearly a rehearsed speech. Every word had Jennifer's fingerprints on it, but he was speaking them with conviction, as if he truly believed what he was saying. I've been calling Jennifer a lot? I repeated. She didn't want to say anything because she didn't want to hurt your feelings. But yeah, and the way you keep suggesting family activities and getting upset when we can't make them. It's a lot of pressure, Mom. I felt something break inside me, something that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. This was my son, my baby, telling me that my desire to maintain relationships with my family was pressure and that expressing disappointment at canceled plans made me clingy. I see, I said carefully. And what do you think I should do about this? Clinginess. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Maybe you should think about developing some interests of your own. Maybe making some new friends. Jennifer suggested that you might benefit from some independence. Of course, Jennifer had suggested that. You know what, Michael? I said, standing up. You're absolutely right. I have been too focused on family lately. Maybe it's time for me to branch out, explore new relationships, figure out who I am when I'm not trying so hard to be the perfect mother and wife. Relief flooded his face. I'm so glad you understand. Mom, we just want you to be happy. After he left, I sat in my empty house and allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to grieve. 10 minutes to mourn the son I'd lost, the family I'd believed in, the life I'd built that was crumbling around me. Then I called David Morrison. I need you to move faster, I told him. And I need you to document everything. Phone calls, meetings, financial transactions, everything. What's changed? They're not just planning to leave me, I said. They're planning to make sure I have nothing left when they do. The investigation moved quickly after that. David was thorough and professional. And within a week, I had a clear picture of just how deep the betrayal went. Charles and Jennifer had been meeting regularly for 8 months. They had lunch dates, afternoon rendezvous at hotels, evening meetings when Michael was traveling. But more damaging were the recordings David had managed to capture of their conversations. I listened to them on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store where no one would think to look for me. She'll get the house in the divorce, Charles was saying, but I've been moving the liquid assets. By the time this is finalized, there won't be much for her to claim. What about the retirement accounts? Jennifer's voice was clear and calculating. Those are trickier, but I've been working with a lawyer. There are ways to minimize what she gets, especially if we can establish that she wasn't a contributing partner in the marriage. Jennifer laughed, a sound that once would have warmed my heart. That shouldn't be hard. She hasn't worked in years. She's been basically useless. The key is making sure she doesn't get suspicious before everything's in place. If she starts asking questions or gets her own lawyer, she won't, Jennifer said confidently. She trusts us completely. And even if she did suspect something, she's too weak to fight back. She'll just accept whatever we give her and be grateful for it. What about Michael? You're sure he won't be a problem? Michael believes everything I tell him. I've got him convinced that his mother is becoming a burden, that she's too dependent on us. By the time this is over, he'll probably thank us for helping him set boundaries. I turned off the recording and sat in the silence of my car, watching ordinary people go about their ordinary lives, buying groceries and loading children into car seats and living their normal, unbetrayed existences. Weak, useless, a burden. That's how they saw me. That's how they'd trained my own son to see me. But they were wrong about one thing. I wasn't too weak to fight back. I was just getting started. The divorce attorney's office felt like a stage set for a play I hadn't auditioned for. Charles sat across from me at the polished conference table, his lawyer beside him with a stack of papers that represented the dismantling of my life. I'd chosen my outfit carefully that morning. A simple navy dress, minimal makeup, my wedding ring still on my finger. I wanted to look like exactly what they expected me to be, a defeated, aging wife who would accept whatever scraps they threw her way. Margaret, Charles's lawyer began, his tone professionally sympathetic. I know this is difficult, but we're hoping we can reach an amicable agreement today. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I just want this to be over with as little conflict as possible. Charles looked relieved. In fact, he looked positively cheerful, which might have been my first clue that something was very wrong. If I hadn't already known exactly how wrong everything was. Now, the lawyer continued, sliding a document across the table, given the length of your marriage and the circumstances, we're proposing a division that we feel is fair to both parties. I picked up the papers with hands I made sure to keep slightly shaky. The numbers swam before my eyes, not because I was too emotional to read them, but because they were so much worse than I'd even imagined. 30%. They were offering me 30% of assets from a marriage that had lasted 28 years. I don't understand, I said, putting just the right amount of confusion in my voice. This seems like so little. Charles leaned forward, his expression a masterpiece of fake concern. Margaret, honey, I know the numbers look small, but you have to understand the reality of our situation. You haven't contributed financially to this household in over a decade. Contributed financially. As if raising his son, managing his household, supporting his career, and sacrificing my own opportunities for nearly 3 decades counted for nothing. The house will need to be sold, of course, his lawyer added smoothly, but we're prepared to ensure you have a reasonable time frame to find suitable accommodations. How reasonable? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the conversations David had recorded. 60 days should be sufficient for someone in your position. Someone in my position? A discarded wife with no career, limited finances, and nowhere to go. At least, that's what they thought my position was. Where will you live? Charles? I asked, genuine curiosity coloring my voice. I'll figure something out, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Probably rent a small apartment until I get back on my feet. It was an impressive performance. If I didn't know that he and Jennifer had already put an offer on a 4-bedroom house in the prestigious Millbrook neighborhood, I might have actually believed him. And what about the retirement accounts? I pressed gently. We've been married so long, surely. The retirement accounts are complicated, his lawyer interrupted. Given that Mr. Patterson has been the sole contributor for the majority of the marriage, and considering the prenuptial agreement. Prenuptial agreement? I blinked in confusion. We didn't sign a prenuptial agreement. Charles and his lawyer exchanged a glance that they probably thought was subtle. Margaret, Charles said gently, I know this is overwhelming, but we absolutely did sign one. Don't you remember? Right before the wedding, when you were so stressed about all the planning, I stared at him, letting my mouth fall open slightly. The prenuptial agreement that didn't exist. They were planning to forge documents to further limit what I could claim in the divorce. I don't remember, I said weakly. Are you sure? I have a copy right here, his lawyer said, producing a document that looked official enough. Your signature is clearly visible. I took the papers with trembling hands and stared at the signature that was supposed to be mine. It was a good forgery, I had to admit. Someone had practiced my handwriting carefully, but there were subtle differences that I doubted they thought I'd notice or be able to prove. This is so much to process, I murmured. Maybe I should have my own lawyer look at this. Of course, Charles said quickly. Take all the time you need. We're not trying to pressure you, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed against the table. He wanted this done quickly, before I had time to think or ask questions or discover the truth. Actually, I said, setting the papers down, I think I understand. You're right, Charles. I haven't contributed much to our financial situation in recent years, and I'm getting older. I probably won't need as much to live on. The relief in the room was palpable. Charles's lawyer made notes while Charles himself looked like a man who'd just won the lottery. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Margaret, Charles said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. I was worried this might get ugly. His touch made my skin crawl, but I managed a watery smile. I just want us both to be happy, Charles. Life's too short for bitterness. What I didn't tell them was that my own lawyer was waiting in another office 3 floors down, armed with copies of every document, recording, and photograph that David Morrison had gathered over the past 2 weeks. What I didn't mention was that I'd spent the morning transferring every remaining asset from our joint accounts into a new account that only I controlled. What they didn't know was that while they'd been busy plotting to leave me with nothing, I'd been busy making sure they'd be the ones with nothing to divide. There is one small thing, I said, as if it had just occurred to me. I'd like to keep a few personal items from the house. Family photos, my mother's jewelry, things like that. Of course, Charles said magnanimously. Take whatever has sentimental value. Thank you. That's very generous. I paused, as if gathering courage. And Charles, I hope you'll be happy. I really do. You deserve to find love again. His lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably, but Charles looked positively radiant. Thank you, Margaret. That means a lot coming from you. As we wrapped up the meeting, I played my part perfectly. I was the grateful, compliant, soon-to-be ex-wife who was just happy to escape with dignity intact. I asked timid questions about health insurance and pension benefits, accepted their patronizing explanations, and thanked them for being so patient with me. "We'll have the final papers ready for signature next week," Charles's lawyer said as we prepared to leave. "That soon?" I asked, injecting just a hint of panic into my voice. "No point in dragging these things out," Charles said firmly. "Fresh starts for both of us, right?" "Right," I agreed. That evening, Jennifer called. It was the first time we'd spoken since I'd discovered the affair, and hearing her voice required every ounce of acting ability I possessed. "Margaret, how are you holding up?" Her voice was syrupy with fake concern. "Charles told me about the meeting today. I'm so sorry you're going through this." "Oh, Jennifer," I said, letting my voice break slightly. "I don't know what I'm going to do. Everything's changing so fast." "I know, sweetie. I know. But you're going to get through this. You're stronger than you think. Stronger than I think." If only she knew. "Charles seems relieved," I continued. "I suppose this has been hard on him, too." "He's trying to put on a brave face," Jennifer said smoothly. "But he's devastated about how things turned out. He really does want what's best for you." "That's comforting to know. And Jennifer, I hope this doesn't change our relationship. You've been like a daughter to me." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Jennifer spoke again, her voice was thick with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Oh, Margaret, you're going to make me cry. Of course this won't change anything between us. If anything, I want to be there for you even more now. Family is family, no matter what. Family is family." The words echoed in my mind as I hung up the phone. She was absolutely right about that, and families protected each other from people who tried to destroy them from within. Jennifer had no idea that she was about to learn exactly what that meant. The final papers were scheduled to be signed on Friday, 4 days away. 4 days for me to put the finishing touches on my own plans while they celebrated their premature victory. That night, I pulled out my notebook one last time and wrote a single entry. "They think they've won. Tomorrow they'll discover exactly how wrong they are." Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, the kind of day that felt like a gift before winter settled in for good. I dressed carefully in a cream-colored suit I'd bought years ago but never worn. Charles had always said it made me look too severe. Today, severe felt exactly right. I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early, carrying my purse and a manila folder that contained 28 years' worth of reckoning. The receptionist offered me coffee, which I declined. I needed my hands steady for what was coming. Charles arrived exactly on time, his lawyer beside him carrying the briefcase that presumably contained my financial death sentence. But it was the woman who walked in behind them that made my heart pound with a mixture of rage and anticipation. Jennifer. She'd dressed for the occasion, too, in a black dress that managed to look both professional and subtly sexy. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and she wore minimal makeup that somehow made her look younger and more innocent than ever. She was playing a role, just as I was. "Margaret," she said, crossing the room to embrace me. "I hope you don't mind that I came. I know this must be so difficult for you, and I wanted to offer moral support." The audacity was breathtaking. Here was the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband, planning to destroy my financial future, and systematically poisoning my son against me, offering me moral support at my own divorce proceedings. "That's so thoughtful of you, dear," I managed, returning her hug with what I hoped looked like genuine gratitude. Charles watched this exchange with visible satisfaction. In his mind, this was probably the perfect ending to his perfect plan. His mistress and his soon-to-be ex-wife embracing like family while he walked away with everything he wanted. "Shall we get started?" his lawyer asked, settling into his chair and opening his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Actually," I said, "before we begin, I'd like to introduce my legal counsel." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Charles's lawyer looked up sharply. "I thought you said you didn't need representation." "I changed my mind," I said simply. "I hope that's not a problem." Before anyone could respond, the conference room door opened and Sarah Chen walked in. 45 years old, Harvard Law School, senior partner at one of the most prestigious family law firms in the state, and according to her reputation, absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her clients' interests. "Good morning," Sarah said, her voice crisp and professional as she took the seat beside me. I'm Sarah Chen, representing Mrs. Patterson in these proceedings. I could see Charles calculating rapidly, trying to figure out how I could afford someone like Sarah Chen. He couldn't know that Sarah was actually doing this pro bono as a favor to David Morrison, who'd helped her through her own messy divorce 5 years earlier. "This is highly irregular," Charles's lawyer said. "We had an agreement in principle. Mrs. Patterson seemed satisfied with the terms we discussed." "Mrs. Patterson was gathering information," Sarah replied smoothly. "And now that we've had a chance to review the proposed settlement, we have some concerns." "What kind of concerns?" Charles asked, and I could hear the first note of panic creeping into his voice. Sarah opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Well, let's start with the prenuptial agreement you claim exists. I've done a thorough search of public records, and I can't seem to find any trace of this document being notarized or filed." "It's right here," Charles's lawyer said, producing the forged document they'd shown me earlier. Sarah examined it carefully, then passed it to me. "Margaret, is this your signature?" I looked at the document as if seeing it for the first time, which in a way, I was. In broad daylight, with Sarah's expert eye guiding mine, the forgery was even more obvious than I'd initially thought. "The handwriting looks similar," I said slowly, "but there are differences. The way I make my ye's, the slant of my letters. This isn't quite right." "That's because it's not your signature at all," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "In fact, I've had this document examined by a handwriting expert. It's a forgery, and not a particularly skilled one." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles's face had gone completely white, while his lawyer stared at the document as if it might spontaneously combust. "But more importantly," Sarah continued, "forging legal documents is a felony. I assume you'll want to withdraw this fraudulent prenup before we continue." Charles's lawyer cleared his throat nervously. "There may have been some confusion about the document's authenticity. We'll certainly want to verify." "Oh, we're just getting started with the verification process," Sarah interrupted. She pulled out another folder. "Let's talk about the systematic transfer of marital assets from joint accounts to accounts bearing only Mr. Patterson's name. $60,000 moved over the past 6 months." Charles looked like he was going to be sick. "But the most interesting discovery," Sarah continued, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone, "involves the nature of Mr. Patterson's relationship with Mrs. Jennifer Patterson, who I believe is present today offering moral support." All eyes turned to Jennifer, who had gone very still in her chair. The confident smile had vanished from her face, replaced by something that looked like terror. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not implying anything," Sarah replied. "I'm stating facts. For example, the fact that you and Mr. Patterson have been conducting an extramarital affair for approximately 8 months. Sarah pulled out a manila envelope and began laying photographs on the conference table. Charles and Jennifer entering a hotel together. Charles and Jennifer kissing in a restaurant parking lot. Charles and Jennifer looking at houses in the Millbrook neighborhood. These were taken by a licensed private investigator, Sarah explained calmly. "But even more damaging are the recorded conversations." She set a small digital recorder on the table and pressed play. Charles's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "She'll get the house in the divorce, but I've been moving the liquid assets. By the time this is finalized, there won't be much for her to claim." Jennifer's laugh followed, cruel and calculating. "That shouldn't be hard. She hasn't worked in years. She's been basically useless." I watched Charles and Jennifer as they listened to their own voices plotting my destruction, and I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. They looked so small suddenly, so pathetic in their exposed desperation. "There's more," Sarah said, fast-forwarding to another section. "This conversation is particularly interesting." Jennifer's voice came through the speaker. "Michael believes everything I tell him. I've got him convinced that his mother is becoming a burden, that she's too dependent on us. By the time this is over, he'll probably thank us for helping him set boundaries." At that moment, the conference room door opened and Michael walked in. I hadn't expected this, and from the look of shock on both Charles's and Jennifer's faces, Neither had they. "I got your message about signing the papers," Michael said to Charles, then stopped as he took in the scene. The photographs spread across the table, the digital recorder, the expressions of guilt and terror on his wife's and father's faces. "What's going on here?" he asked slowly. "Your wife and father have been having an affair," I said quietly, "and they've been systematically manipulating you to turn against me so they could steal everything and start a new life together." Michael stared at the photographs, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing horror. "Jennifer? Dad? What is this?" Jennifer started to cry then, not the elegant tears of a wronged woman, but ugly, desperate sobs. "Michael, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," Sarah said, pressing play on another recording. This time it was Charles's voice. "What about Michael? You're sure he won't be a problem?" "Michael believes everything I tell him," came Jennifer's response. "I've got him convinced that his mother is becoming a burden, that she's too dependent on us." Michael sank into an empty chair, his face white with shock. "Jennifer, how could you do this? How could either of you do this? We never meant for you to get hurt," Charles said desperately. We fell in love. These things happen." "These things happen?" Michael's voice cracked. "You stole money from Mom. You forged legal documents. You manipulated me into treating her like garbage for months. You made me believe she was the problem." The room fell silent except for Jennifer's continued sobbing. Charles sat frozen, apparently unable to find words that could possibly explain or excuse what he'd done. Sarah closed her folders and looked across the table at Charles's lawyer. "I think we're ready to discuss a revised settlement offer." "What do you want?" Charles's lawyer asked weakly. "Everything," Sarah said simply. "Mrs. Patterson will retain the family home, all remaining marital assets, and Mr. Patterson will pay substantial alimony for the next 10 years. In exchange, we won't pursue criminal charges for the forgery and financial fraud." "That's not fair," Jennifer said through her tears. "Charles has rights too." "Charles forfeited his rights when he chose to commit fraud," Sarah replied. "As did you when you chose to conspire with him." Michael stood up slowly, looking at his wife and father with disgust. "I need to go. I can't even look at either of you right now." As he reached the door, he turned back to me. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for everything." After he left, the negotiations proceeded quickly. Charles had no choice but to accept our terms, and within an hour, the papers were signed. I would keep everything we'd built together over 28 years, while he would start over with nothing but his paycheck and the knowledge that he'd destroyed his family for a woman who was already planning her exit strategy. As we prepared to leave, Jennifer approached me one last time. "Margaret, I know you hate me, but I want you to know that I really did care about you. At the beginning, I looked at this young woman who'd systematically destroyed my family while smiling to my face, and I felt something like sadness for her." "No, Jennifer," I said quietly. "You never cared about me. You cared about what I could give you. There's a difference." Walking out of that office building into the bright afternoon sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in months. The betrayal still hurt, and it probably always would. But I was free now, free from people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. And for the first time in years, that was enough. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee for one, watching the morning sun stream through windows that were finally, truly mine. The house felt different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the weight of deception and manipulation had been lifted from every room. Charles's belongings were long gone, packed up and moved to a studio apartment across town where he now lived alone. Jennifer had moved back to her parents' house in another state, her tail between her legs and her reputation in ruins. The divorce that was supposed to leave me with nothing had instead left me with everything that mattered: my home, my dignity, and my freedom. The doorbell rang just as I was settling into my favorite armchair with my coffee and the morning paper. Through the window, I could see Michael standing on the porch, and my heart did that little skip it always did when I saw my son, even now. "Hi, Mom," he said when I opened the door. He looked older somehow, more mature than he had 6 months ago. The betrayal had aged him, but in some ways, it had also freed him. "Hello, sweetheart. Come in." He followed me to the kitchen, accepting the cup of coffee I offered and settling into the same chair he'd occupied as a child when he wanted to talk about something serious. "How are you doing?" he asked, studying my face carefully. It was a question he'd asked every time he visited over the past 6 months, as if he was still afraid he might find me broken beyond repair. "I'm good," I said, and meant it. Really good, actually. It was true. The first few weeks after the divorce had been difficult. Not because of grief for my marriage, that had died long before the papers were signed, but because of the adjustment to a life that was entirely my own. For 28 years, I'd defined myself through my relationships to other people: Charles's wife, Michael's mother, Jennifer's mother-in-law. Learning to simply be Margaret had taken time. "The divorce is final?" Michael asked. "As of yesterday. Charles will be paying alimony for the next 10 years. The house is mine, free and clear, and I kept all the retirement accounts." I paused, setting down my coffee cup. "I'm thinking of taking that trip to Europe I always wanted to take." Michael smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. "Dad always said Europe was too expensive." "Your father said a lot of things that turned out not to be true." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Our relationship was still healing, still finding its way back to the closeness we'd shared before Jennifer's poison took hold. But it was getting stronger every day. "I filed for divorce too," Michael said suddenly. I'd been expecting this news for weeks, but it still hit me with a complex mix of emotions. Relief that he was finally free from Jennifer's manipulation, sadness that his marriage had to end, and worry about how he would handle being alone. "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. "Relieved, mostly. Angry at myself for being so blind." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Mom, I need to apologize again for how I treated you. The things I said, the way I acted. Michael, we've been through this. You were manipulated by someone who was very good at manipulation. You're not the first person to fall for it, and you won't be the last. But I should have known better. I should have trusted my instincts about you instead of letting her poison my mind." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You know better now. That's what matters." He squeezed my fingers gratefully. "Jennifer wants to see me. She's been calling, saying she can explain everything, that she made mistakes but still loves me. And what do you think about that? I think she's panicking because she's pregnant and alone and needs someone to take care of her." His voice was flat, emotionless. "She played me for years. Mom, she made me believe you were the problem in our family while she was sleeping with my father and planning to steal everything from you. I can't get past that." I felt a stab of sympathy for Jennifer, despite everything she'd done. Pregnancy was hard enough without facing it alone, disgraced and financially unstable. But sympathy wasn't the same as forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't the same as trust. "What about the baby?" I asked gently. "Paternity test confirmed it's Dad's," Michael said with a bitter laugh. "So even if I wanted to work things out with Jennifer, I'd be raising my father's child with the woman who helped him destroy our family. I'm not that forgiving." The baby. Charles's baby with Jennifer. In another lifetime, that child might have been my grandchild, someone I would have loved and spoiled and helped raise. Now it would be a stranger, growing up knowing that its parents' relationship had been built on betrayal and cruelty. "Your father came by last week," I said. Michael's expression darkened. "What did he want?" "To apologize," he said, "and to ask if I might consider reducing the alimony payments." "You said no, I hope." "I said I'd think about it." Michael started to protest, but I held up my hand. "I'm not going to reduce them." But I wanted him to spend some time wondering what I might decide. He put me through months of uncertainty and manipulation. He can handle a little uncertainty of his own. Michael laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from him in far too long. "You've gotten ruthless in your old age, Mom." "I've gotten selective about where I direct my kindness." After Michael left, I spent the afternoon in my garden, something I'd neglected during the final months of my marriage, when every day had felt like a performance. The roses needed pruning, the flower beds were overgrown with weeds, and the vegetable patch I'd once been so proud of had been completely overtaken by ivy. But underneath the neglect, the bones of the garden were still good. The soil was rich, the established plants were strong, and with some care and attention, it could bloom again. Like me, I thought, pulling weeds with therapeutic determination. That evening, I had dinner with my neighbor Ruth, who had become a close friend again after months of Jennifer's subtle interference. We talked about travel plans, about the book club Ruth wanted me to join, about the volunteer work at the animal shelter that I was considering. You know, Ruth said as we lingered over dessert, you seem happier than I've seen you in years. I feel happier, I admitted. It's strange. I went through this terrible betrayal, lost my marriage, discovered my family wasn't what I thought it was. I should be devastated. But you're not. No, I'm free. I considered my words carefully. For the first time in my adult life, I get to decide what I want to do with my days, where I want to go, what I want to see, who I want to spend time with. Nobody's manipulating me or lying to me or using me for what I can provide. It's just me, making my own choices. Ruth raised her wine glass in a toast. To making your own choices. To making your own choices, I agreed. Later that night, I sat in my living room with a photo album I hadn't looked at in years. Pictures of Charles and me when we were young and genuinely happy. Photos of Michael as a baby, then a toddler, then a young man. Family vacations and birthday parties and Christmas mornings. For a long time, I'd thought these memories were tainted by what came after. But looking at them now, I realized that wasn't true. Those moments had been real, even if they didn't last. The love I'd felt for my family had been genuine. Even if it wasn't returned in the end, the life I'd built had meaning, even if it was ultimately destroyed by people I trusted. I closed the album and put it away, not because I was trying to forget the past, but because I was finally ready to stop living in it. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. Thank you for everything, Mom. I love you. I smiled, typing back, I love you too, always. Then I turned off the lights and went upstairs to my bedroom. My bedroom now not shared with someone who was planning my destruction. Tomorrow I would call the travel agent about that trip to Europe. I would sign up for the photography class I'd been wanting to take. I would start volunteering at the shelter where Ruth said they needed help with the older dogs that nobody wanted to adopt. The older dogs that nobody wanted. Like me, supposedly, Charles and Jennifer had seen me as outdated, useless, an obstacle to be removed. They'd underestimated my intelligence, my strength, and my capacity for strategic thinking. Their mistake had become my liberation. I fell asleep that night in my house, in my bed, surrounded by my things and my choices and my hard-won peace. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, but inside, I was warm and safe, and finally, completely free. The woman who had been systematically erased from her own life was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth, someone who would never again allow herself to be diminished by people who saw her as disposable. I was 65 years old, divorced and starting over, and for the first time in decades, I couldn't wait to see what came next.